We're experts in this field, and we want to share some secrets and tips if you are making any changes or if you're trying to retire legacy systems. Just getting started with some legal information. This is for informational purposes only. This does not constitute legal or medical advice. So if you're on today's call, I assume you're falling into one of these categories. You're either switching to a new PM or EHR system, you recently switched and still have access to your old systems, or you've switched a long time ago in the past and still have access and are trying to consolidate things and simplify your infrastructure. So first of all, let's talk about switching. So we did do a survey that you'll see a lot of information from in this presentation of 54 practices in ophthalmology, representing about 500 clinicians overall. And when we did that this past summer in collaboration with the American Society of Ophthalmic Administrators, we found that most practices have EHR for 8.5-year average, which makes sense because the EHR incentive program went into place in 2011. A lot of practices are still on the original system that they were on or have made a switch in the past few years. The biggest issues we've seen is poor customer service, the system's holding you back, systems aren't being updated, there's integration issues, data access, or severe outages. And we found that of all those groups that had made a switch in the past 5 years, 62% of them went to the cloud. The other thing to keep in mind for this year, if you're not familiar with it already, is updating to the 2015 CEHRT Cures update. This is now required for the MIPS program, but also for the Cures Act. In order to comply with that, you'll need a Cures update version EHR. Some EHRs have not gone through certification yet. Some are not planning to go on through certification due to the burden. So you should be checking with your vendors to see what's happening there, and you may need to make a switch in order to comply with other requirements. Similarly, if a system is no longer being supported, we've seen a lot of consolidation of systems between different companies merging together, and their older versions or older software they may no longer support, or what they call sunsetting. So if that's the case, you'll need to find an alternative. Also, if you're involved in a merger acquisition, oftentimes the data is all combined into a single platform, and then you have old information that you need to store or figure out what to do. And then I kind of touched on it before, but like I said, about 62% switched to cloud. That's not just because of convenience. Usually that has to do a lot with cost. So if you think of the cost of maintaining servers and VPN and replication, licensing, support, compared to a single fee that most of these modern cloud-based systems charge, definitely is outweighed. And that came through in our survey as well. So we found that while the total cost of the EHR software on a server-based system is lower to the software vendor, the EHR hardware budget definitely boosts that overall cost. So it's something to factor in between as you look between these two. This QR code, if you want to scan it, that's going to take you over to a blog article where we go into all of these survey results in depth. And you can also subscribe to our blog there by putting in your email. We send out blog updates depending on your preference, either as they're published, weekly, or monthly. So if you did switch or you're planning on switching, hopefully you migrated most of your data. So the reason why you want to do this is mainly data entry, that amount of time it takes. I don't think a lot of people, when they decide not to do the migration or they look at the cost of it, they're not thinking of the hidden costs of the employees' time, overtime, just general stress of doing that on top of doing their regular job. On top of that, just historical data access. If you're going to manually input things, you're probably going to only input like the highlights, not everything. You still need to keep access to all that old information. Easier to go live. So when you're going live on a system, you want really to be there with the trainer or focus on the training that you just did and learn how to use a system. But if you're also manually entering data from the old system, you're just going to try to get through the day and you might miss out on the actual training of the program. So getting that out and getting a baseline and getting your chart prepped definitely helps. And then finally, compliance. So you know your state specifics, I'm sure, but some require up to 30 years of clinical data and up to 7 years of financial data. So finding a long-term option here is important. Now, there are standards and regulations that work in your favor. I think we are all familiar with HIPAA. So this covers any business associate. So if you have a business associate agreement signed with your EHR PM vendor, which you definitely should, that prevents the business associate from blocking access to your PHI that would violate the HIPAA privacy rule. This has come up. Unfortunately, we've had practices that have been in payment disputes. Maybe they're not getting the service that they are expected to under contract, and they withhold payment or something, and then the vendor shuts down access. That's not actually allowed. They can make it read only. You know, they can do many things, but just cutting off access is not allowed. Also, if you were to end your contract with a vendor, they do need to have some way to deal with that data and getting it back to you. What's limited about the HIPAA business associate agreement is it has to be provided, but it doesn't exactly say how or in what format. So if you wanted to discreetly convert data from your old system to new, you know, if you get it in that format, that's great, but HIPAA didn't really anticipate any of this electronic health information stuff that we deal with now. So that is why there's been newer regulations that have come through since then. You may be familiar with 2015 CEHRT if you participate in the MIPS program. So up until the end of last year, this was the latest certified version. And the requirement here is to produce what's called a CCDA that includes a subset of all of the clinical information. So it's not everything, but it's at least like what's called the common clinical data set, encounter diagnoses, and some other items that really, depending on your specialty, you may or may not need. But you're supposed to be able to go into the system, filter on a date and time period, and export that in real time or schedule or recurring, and save that locally. This is a requirement of that certified product. So you can definitely go to your vendor and ask how it should be done. But we have seen systems that say they're certified to this, but then that doesn't actually work. But keep in mind, the 2015 certified version was retired as of December 31st of last year. So that means if you're on this version of a product, it is no longer the latest version, and all EHR vendors have to get recertified if they have not already. And that is to the 2015 CEHRT Cures update. So this is what is really taking HIPAA to the 21st century, hence the name of the law. This requires all electronic health information to be provided not only between the vendor and you as a practice, but between you and a patient, payers, other doctors. So we're really getting away from fax, getting into electronic health information, but you can use this rule in your favor to help get data if you're making switches. So they need to be able to provide it in a machine readable format. And they list different formats that are available, and the vendor's allowed to charge a reasonable profit margin to do this work. But reasonable is really like a lofty term. But basically you can ask for a disclosure of the fees that make up the charge that they're charging you to see if that is accurate and negotiate with them. There are some milestones to keep in mind. So October 6th of last year, they used to have this, what's called restricted to the US CDI, which for layman's terms is there was a set of things that were required to be exportable in a machine readable format. As of October 6th, that limitation has been removed. So all data included in the HIPAA designated record set is what is required. And the HIPAA designated record set has been the same since the original rule. That's pretty much all data, including financial data. So it's pretty much everything that you have in your system should be able to come out in a machine readable format. And then starting December 31st of 2023, so the end of this year at the time of recording, vendors who are certified to this version are required to provide an export capability for a single patient or the entire patient population. They cannot charge extra for this unless it was agreed in writing at the time the EHR was acquired. So your original contract, if it has fees in it, then that's what you have to deal with. So check that if you're negotiating new contracts for sure. But if there is no actual pricing, which I haven't really seen a lot of vendors have this in there, then there is no charge possible. But this is really expanding what that 2015 CEHRT requirement was and expanding it to include all information included in that designated record set. And we have seen a few EHR vendors already have this capability in their software today, which we applaud because that definitely helps with interoperability and data portability. And we expect anyone who's certified to this version to have that capability by the end of the year. So when you combine all this information, what this means is if you are on a 2015 CEHRT update product, you are in the best place possible. There should be a way for you to export the data yourself or with the help of a company like us, and then we can do with it what you need. If you're still on a 2015 CEHRT, there is that self-export, but it's going to be a limited format. And then if you're on any other uncertified system or decertified system, you can use HIPAA to at least get the data in some format. At the end of the day, this is just going to show you that you can pretty much try to get as much data out of an old system, but it's very rare that you're going to actually get everything out and migrated into your new system. It's not as simple as it may seem, if it does seem simple. Luckily, with these new rules and standardization, we're going to get to that point. But at this point, every system has its own requirements and limitations. So you need to start to think of what to do with everything else. So usually the EHR record is not completely copied into the new system. And I have in here an example, like maybe you have an Excel file of all the exported financial data, or maybe you have a folder of a bunch of PDFs. But what are you going to do with that, and how are you going to simplify accessing that information is key. So how to continue with legacy data access. Going back to our survey, we asked our practices if they still had access to their EHR records historically. A majority had read-only access, followed by that everything was converted. And then some had full access, and then some had a separate archive application that was not what the system was originally, and it was migrated into that. Now, looking at the reasoning why practices continue to have access to that prior EHR, the main issues are, I think, pretty expected. So record retention, accessing data that wasn't converted, viewing historical chart notes, documents, prepping charts, requests, statements, receipts, posting payments, claims, and some other stuff. So pretty much everything you needed to do in your old systems, practices are keeping those up and running to some degree to complete that. So some tips when you are making a change. One of the things I can highly recommend is if you are switching, do not set your old system to cancel or to start your new system the same day or same week as you're switching to that new system. This has come up a few times, and we always recommend that you keep that old system running at least for a couple of months, just to make sure that not only you're able to run down existing charts and AR, depending on if it's PM or EHR, but also, things can happen with go live. They could get moved. It could be canceled. There could be, a natural disaster, knock on wood. So keep that up and running, but also still pay attention to your contractual obligations. A lot of these systems will say that you have to request 30 days in advance or 90 days in advance, or you're locked in for a year. We've had practices switch systems, and then they didn't realize they were in a contract for 3 more years. And so now they have 2 contracts that they can't get out of. So make sure you're taking your termination clause, and also the communication and how you have to terminate. We've had practices email the support person that they know saying, hey, we're canceling, and then they go to cancel and they still get a bill, and the company says, you were supposed to send us a written notice to this email address or to this fax number. Like they all have like a specific way to do it. So do it by their policy, and make sure you have that in writing that is confirmed. And then set that termination date to be after the go live. Like I said, usually running down the AR should take 4 to 6 weeks. So I would say 2 months at least. Keep that running in the old system. Also, that allows you to compare the systems and access the old information in a familiar format. If people are getting concerned about switching to the new system, it's kind of like training wheels before you fully let loose and are dedicated into the new system. So there's pretty much a few different options in what to do in getting access and maintaining access to that old system. So first, start with working with your prior vendor on how you can continue to work with any non-migrated data. Most vendors will have some kind of default way of of offering this, and there will be charges usually associated with it. If you are on a server-based system, typically you need to check your contract, but typically you paid up front for the license, and now you're just paying for support. So it might be possible to pay a lower support fee or no support fee and just pay like an hourly rate if you need support while you continue to reference the old system. We have seen, especially in companies that have been acquired by other companies, they say, oh no, you have to keep paying for your license. But if you look back into whatever your original agreement was, make sure you see what you're actually paying for, because it might just be support. If you're on a web-based system, it's a little bit more restrictive. Obviously, with what's nice about a cloud-based system is that vendors are managing everything, but the drawback is they have everything. However, all these rules are designed to make this as easy as possible. So you're typically paying for an ongoing license. So there will be some kind of cost to access it continuously, but you should be able to reduce the number of users if it's a user-based pricing model, or they should have a read-only access option. There should be some way for you to continue to have access without paying the same rate that you were always paying. Now, if they don't have read-only access, or you were just given a big exported dump of everything in, let's say, PDF spreadsheets, all this stuff in a bunch of folders, the question is like, how easy is that for you to access? Sometimes you just get a database backup, and if you don't have a IT staff that's able to set up a server, you're not really going to be able to access that information at all. But most vendors are providing like a big export with the patient folder and then all this patient's documents in some kind of format, which is fine. But then navigating that can be problematic. You can easily delete things, move things, mess things up. So you probably want a better solution for that anyway. Also keep in mind the record retention requirements. So HIPAA doesn't actually have any timeframes for record retention for the actual medical record, just the privacy policies, business associate agreement, things like that. But you should look at your state's payers, and if you're part of any accreditation research and certain financial programs or federal programs that have their own year length requirements. Now, if your current system or prior system is on a server, this is something that I think gets overlooked a lot. Pay attention to these end-of-life updates. If your server's operating system or OS is no longer supported by the vendor, then it's not HIPAA compliant because they can't patch it if there's a virus or something. So if you're not sure what your server version is, by the way, this is all Microsoft. We might not have a Microsoft server, but it's just an example. Check with your IT company or your in-house IT on this. But basically right now, if you have SQL Server 2017 or prior, you are on an outdated end-of-life product. Now, if you are on SQL Server 2014, 2016, or 2017, and you purchased extended support, which is an additional cost, then you can see that there's an additional extension there that goes out a few years. So if you're in that time frame, definitely make sure that you are still having actual support of the product, or you're in violation of HIPAA. And if there's a breach or ransomware or something like that, that's going to be the cause, and that can lead to penalties. If you're on SQL Server 2019, which I know a lot of practices are, because that's the version that's been pretty active since 2018, and a lot of people have been using EHR more and more lately. That ends in 2025, and then you can extend to 2030. So just keep in mind, I mean, we're in 2023, so that's 2 years out, but starting to think through that and not getting creeped up on that deadline will be important. Something to keep in mind when you are upgrading. So it's not that you have to leave the server. You could just upgrade to the next version, like SQL Server 2022 is valid through 2028. But these software vendors like Microsoft are going to keep coming up with new ones and having an end of life, and you have to pay for the upgrade for the license. Sometimes your server is not going to support these versions, so you're going to have to buy a whole new server. So the infographic on the right is also from Microsoft. So it says you could take your SQL Server and you could either modernize it to what they call Azure, which is their cloud-based product. So you could do this with your IT company, or many vendors offer this solution to basically take your database, throw it up into the cloud, and then depending on your system, you can continue to access and use it just on a cloud. And what's nice about the cloud-based systems is they're always updated. the latest. You're not really like having to upgrade each version unless you are setting up a virtual machine. The other option is to modernize and upgrade to on-premise, or you can stay with the existing system that you have, but you have to pay for those extended security updates. Now you could keep the server up and running like that, or you can look at a cloud-based archival system. And the things you want to look for in a cloud-based system, which there are many different ones out there, both healthcare related and healthcare specific. It should be hosted on a modern cloud architecture. I just mentioned Azure, that's Microsoft's cloud system. Amazon has AWS, which is another major system. What's nice about these is they're managed by these huge tech companies that implement a lot of security features, redundancy, data access. So it's much more reliable typically than like a smaller company's server farm. And while these are just as susceptible to outages as anything else, usually when something like AWS goes down, it's really impacting a lot of different companies. So it's not as rare, it's not as common as you might think, and it's a big deal when it does happen. Also, you want to make sure that things are accessible via like a simple web browser. So having additional software, downloading that, setting that up just adds additional complexity. So having one that just opens right in like Google Chrome, for example, is going to be great. Also, if they can integrate into your current EHR and PM with patient context. And what I mean by that is if you're in your EHR and you're in Alice Smith's chart and you say, oh, I need to go see that, that visit from last year and check the intraocular pressure, for example. You should be able to click a button and it takes you into that archive app, into that patient, so you don't have to look them up again. And then you can go look at whatever information you have in there. You should also look for a system that has unlimited users and has the pricing model based on the amount of people using the system. Reason I say that is some systems charge per user. And as a result, practices will get one user and then share that user login with everybody, which is a huge HIPAA problem. And it's something you don't want to do. So a lot of systems instead allow you to have as many users as you like, but the cost of the product is based on how many people are currently using it. So, at the beginning, when you first make a migration, you're probably going to have a lot of people in it. But as you continue to use the archive less and less, the price of it theoretically should start to reduce as you don't have a lot of people using it anymore. And then also something to keep in mind is usability and ease of use. So you're already switching from one system to another. Everyone's learning a whole nother system. To teach everybody a archiving tool as well just sounds crazy. So you want to make sure you're finding a system that is easy to use, intuitive, and that can get people through finding what they need without a lot of training. And believe it or not, we have a product that meets all of these requirements, and it's called Kyval. We launched it just a few years ago, and this app allows you to pretty much do everything listed here. You can access the information remotely in a modern cloud-based system that's very easy to use. So easy, in fact, that I'm going to take you through a quick demo so you can see how it looks. All right, so this is the Kyval homepage. If you are using an integration that we support, then you actually will bypass this and go right into the patient. But otherwise, you can search for a patient up here by name, ID, date of birth, and that ID can be the old ID and new if you have multiple versions. And by the way, you can see we have the practice name up here. We can support multiple practices. So if you are combining a bunch of practices into a new group, especially if you're like a larger health system or private equity group, you can actually have everything in one system, and then you can have access to each individual practice, and you can have permissions so that only certain users can access certain areas. So I just searched for Smith, and I have Alice Smith here. Click on that. And then we really just have a single page layout for an entire patient. So demographics are listed here, contacts, like if there's any emergency contacts, documents, if you end up uploading like scanned images, chart notes, everything you click on here can be viewed natively within the program. You can also download it, print it, Insurances. This is something that we don't normally see a lot of vendors taking in these days because it can get confusing. So we can have the insurances listed here as well. Appointments. So we pretty much are always converting appointments into systems, but some only accept future appointments. So if you have appointment history, that can all be listed here. This view we have set to like pending appointments versus all to see canceled and things like that. The big thing, the most common thing we get asked for, because a lot of systems don't support this, is converting financial data. So like I mentioned before, you'll want to keep your old system up and running to run down your accounts receivable and work it. But once you're done and it's just sitting there and you just need to reference it, that's where Kyval can come in. So right here, we have a list of open balances or all the balances. When you click in, you can see the claim. And if you're familiar with looking at a claim, we try to keep it as simple as possible and pretty much match what a claim form looks like. So we have the claim details at the top, the ICD codes, and then each charge line with charge details. And then you can click in and view further details like payments, transitions between the clearinghouses, write-offs, you name it. Pretty much we can take everything from your old system and put it in here. And also if you had any comments in the old system for billing, we can have that in here as well. So overall, it's a read-only system that has all that information you need with the ability to download, print, and also configure reporting based on what you need to get information on, which is usually that financial side. So that is Kyval in a nutshell, as I hope it is to you. It's very simple to click around to see what you want. You can't really break anything. It's all read-only. And this is available today. All right, so just to recap today's presentation, number one, know your rights under your contract and regulations like HIPAA and the Cures Act. We do have a webinar and blog articles on the Cures Act and HIPAA, so definitely encourage you to check out our blog, check out our YouTube channel at Marsden Advisors for more detail on that. Definitely take advantage of the migration event, migrate as much as information that your new vendor accepts. If you need any help with migrations, definitely reach out to us. That's our bread and butter, and we are very familiar with that. And our goal is always to convert as much as possible that's reasonable, but we definitely want to make sure you get the most data because we've all pretty much at our company worked out of practice and understand how important that is. Close out your routine access into legacy systems. That should reduce your cost. It also reduces your liability. If you can't edit anything and you restrict it just down to people who need it, it just makes it much more safe overall. Work with your prior vendor to identify a low-cost, long-term access solution. And if it's on a server, make sure you're keeping up with those server upgrades, or you can simplify things and migrate to an archive app like Kyval. We're continuing that EHR survey that I provided that data on. We want to keep this up and keep updated information. So we are inviting everybody on today's call to take our survey at mrsdn.com/EHR costs. That QR code there will take you right over to that survey. Should take no longer than maybe 5 to 6 minutes. What we're asking is, did you switch? When did you switch? Why? Some information that will really help us understand the industry better and make sure that our solution is providing everything that you need. As a special offer, the first 25 entries that go in to do that survey will win a $10 gift card of your choice. So definitely fill that out. You'll just need to put your email in at the end to qualify for the gift card. If you want to do that, you can just do an anonymous survey. That's fine. And if you have any questions on the presentation on Kyval or on the migration or any issues you're dealing with in trying to get data, definitely email us at getstarted@marsdenadvisors.com and we can see how we can help. I'll pause here if you want to grab that QR code. If you have any questions, definitely take advantage of the Q&A box. We will stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions. And if you have any questions after the call, or you'd like to get your own demo and better understand your situation and how you'd like to use a product like Kyval, or if you just have general questions about switching, definitely email us and we'll get you over to an expert. We have a question. Let's see. So you mentioned that the new cures update is required this year. When do we need to get updated to that version? So great question. So all EHRs were required to basically attest that they would get their certification done by the end of last year, or they would be decertified. So if you're still on a 2015 cert product, technically it's decertified. You can still use it to submit your MIPS for last year, assuming it's 2015 cert. But for MIPS this year, if you're participating in the promoting interoperability category, then you need that functionality in that application for cures the entire time you do your reporting period. So if you're doing a 90-day reporting period, for example, you need it to be able to do all the functions of Cures Act updated product, but it doesn't need to be the certified version. As long as the certification version gets installed by the last day of your reporting period, then that is fine. So you might end up getting all the functionality, but just the actual certified version is on its way out. So work with your vendor to understand that. I know a lot of vendors have already started updating practices automatically, especially if you're on a cloud-based product. Now, if you aren't doing promoting interoperability, but you are electronically reporting your quality measures either directly out of your EHR or through our registry integration, like Iris Registry, Dataderm, something like that, then you need to have the certified version by the end of the reporting period. So that would be December 31st of this year. So if you're not participating in MIPS, then there isn't necessarily a specific requirement here, but you do need to comply with the Cures Act requirements, and not having a system that is capable of doing what you need to do under Cures Act is just going to make that work much harder. We have another question of what are the requirements under Cures Act for practice. So like I mentioned, we do have a blog article that goes over that in detail. It's not the simplest thing to go into in one question, but what I will say is it's pretty much all your requirements that you had under HIPAA, but in a digital format. So the long-term goal here is that the data is easily shared between practices and the patients in an easy, simple way, which is typically known as an API. So if you're familiar with something like Apple Health, that's really the long-term goal. I think all of us have 10 different logins to patient portals across all the different doctors, or we choose to go to like a hospital system, knowing that all the data will be in one spot. And that's actually why the Cures Act was created, because it's basically preventing that monopolization or use of data for like market share, essentially. So if I'm able as a patient to go to all these different doctors, these independent doctors, and I can have all my data in one system like Apple Health, for example, then I'm not going to go pick a doctor just because I know that they all use the same EHR or something like that. So this is a long-term process that's going to take time, but this is overall going to help practices and patients, because patients can access the data, especially if they're giving care to to their loved ones, grandparents, for example. And then also your whole records request process that you need to do is going to be automated under these requirements, and not only for patients, but also payer requests, things like that. This should definitely cut down on a lot of manual work you do. So it sounds like a lot of work and a lot of annoying government stuff, but and trust me, there's a lot of that in there, but long-term goal is to really modernize our system and get us away from those old fax machines. All right, it looks like we have no other questions right now. I'd like to thank all of you for joining today. I know this is a very fascinating, exciting topic, but I hope I made it as easy to digest as possible, and definitely encourage you to enter that survey. That kind of information is crucial to help us continue to do more education like this, and also to develop our products and services to meet your needs. Again, this is Randy Marsden, President of Marsden Advisors. If you have any questions for me, me at getstarted@marsdenadvisors.com. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.